What is going on, guys? Well, welcome to Seattle Data Guy live tonight on Monday. Hold on, I'm going to stop shaking my camera here in a second. Just let me make sure to fix something. Hold on. Oh, there we go. Perfect. All right, what's going on, guys? Okay, it's a minute past. I'd like a refund now. Well, annoyingly, well, I shouldn't say annoyingly. I'm sure he's got a good reason, but yeah, Chad hasn't seemed to jump on yet, so that's why I was kind of waiting to see if he'd jump on. Why is my camera refocusing? But he has not, so I'm going to kind of keep going without this. I'm going to see if my camera kind of fix itself here in a second. Come on. There we go. All right, perfect. So it will just be me tonight, I guess. Your favorite. Hopefully everyone's having a wonderful evening tonight. It's I'm still kind of reeling with the fact that July is kind of feeling like it's almost over, and we're about to get to August. In terms of the whole data world, I'm trying to think of what I've been seeing mostly. I think, sorry, that was loud. I think in terms of like what I've been thinking about, I recently just put out my article in terms, if you're on my newsletter, kind of continuing some thoughts I had about Airflow. Should you use it? If you're not signed up for the newsletter, feel free to do that. It's usually in a lot of my comments for most of my other videos. So, hey there, Joe. You're doing, yep, Seattle data dude, Denver data dude. Yeah, I think the other thing that I was just reading was okay, sorry about that. I was just reading, what article was I reading? It's called On Bullshit Investing, which I thought was very just funny. If anyone's read Noah Opinion, it's spelled Noah and then Pinion. It's kind of a funny little read in terms of excited for another life. Yeah, thank you, Sanjay. But it's a great little read in terms on like investing and probably kind of how it's been for the past, I don't know, 2+ years. The author, they ended up having a guest author. Actually, I can share my screen. Let me just share my screen. Share screen. Let's do this. Let me just make sure it's okay. Cool. Yeah. So this is kind of the last article I've been kind of putting together, or not putting together, but reading. It's on No Opinions Substack, but with guest post. Just found it interesting in terms of a lot of everything that we've been probably dealing with. Kind of if you have been a very high risk investor recently, in terms of maybe investing in something that was basically fraud. That I imagine was not a great feeling for some people. And yeah, it was just an interesting quick read. Well, actually, it's not a quick read, but interesting read in terms of kind of like everything from crazy ETFs and SPACs that have kind of been developed, that have kind of pulled us all in, and they sound great and often have great returns, but often are just kind of some sort of Ponzi scheme in the making. So I found that just kind of interesting. Just reading through that. So that's kind of what I've been reading this week. I'm still gonna let me go see if by any chance Chad has said anything recently. Let's see. I'm trying to use my actual what is this? My actual stand here, so I'm not constantly cricking my neck. So that's why it keeps shaking every time it kind of does a thing. So what are my thoughts on crypto? I think I can see possibly, I guess, some value in maybe some of the more mainstream ones, but definitely not someone that's put too much money out there in crazy risk. I think I own a little Ethereum, which I think sold out of when it went beyond beyond maybe 3,000. Once it started dropping there, I was like, this feels like it's gonna be a little bit. So that's kind of where I was at. You're an investor too. I mean, wouldn't say I'm like a brilliant investor. I'm someone who occasionally invests and mostly does what I think most people should do, which is ETFs. I think where's the rest of my money? I have like a little small fund for fun, I think, like most people. And what is it? It's a big portion of it in Target. So sadly that took a dive as well. Some Snowflake, some oddly a few Wood REITs, and those are always my saving grace. Those things have been solid forever. Like I think even during the downturn in 2020, I just bought more of it, and that's been solid. Not financial advice, of course. It's just oddly enough, I am the son of a carpenter, so I was like, I might as well buy like lumber REITs because that just seems to make sense. So not an investor, but I think like anyone else, just occasionally you get a little bored. So let's see. Someone just posted some interesting DE problems to be solved in the crypto space. Interviewed with the place a few months ago who need to pull transactions off chain and to determine NFT owners. Yeah, no, I actually earlier this year, I think I almost started doing some work on a crypto project, but it just didn't happen. But yeah, there's plenty of DE work there as well. A lot of analytics that need to happen in terms of transactions, where are these transactions occurring? Are the people are they real? A lot of these crypto wallets and things of that nature, brokers and things that have a lot of these transactions that are occurring elsewhere, right? Like they're either bots or they're just trying to track if there's anything nefarious. I think the pragmatic engineer has written on this a lot because he has dealt with like developing payment systems. So, from his perspective, he's dealt with a lot of fraud in a more centralized system. So just his perspective is that, on a more decentralized system with less regulation, you're just going to increase the likelihood of fraud. And thus you need to have even crazier systems, or not crazier, I should say, like more sophisticated systems in order to detect, any form of behavior that you don't want, some bad actors. Which makes sense, right? Like it's very tricky to kind of manage that, especially when you have a somewhat semi-anonymous system. I say semi-anonymous because it's always easy. Like once you know who's who, it's no longer semi-anonymous, which, if you've watched anything like CoffeeZilla or any of the similar channels, you've kind of watched as they've kind of broken down how they backwards trace who's who. So it's not impossible, especially if you're a large person. If you're like a nobody, I'm sure it's pretty easy to hide. But I'm pretty sure if you're making large transactions, it's easier to kind of pinpoint. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting DE and DS problems in that space for sure. And so we'll kind of see what that is. What's this? Although in my opinion, until real assets get onboarded onto the blockchain, it's mostly going to be scams, vaporware in the space. Yeah, and I mean like that's not even that different. One could argue from the data space, right? The data space itself has had its fair share as well, as we're trying to build like ML models. Like everyone's doing some form of I don't know, crazy startup, and they're adding in like we're doing ML, and we always look under the hood and it's like, no, well, sort of. Adding blockchain to or crypto to your startup is like adding ML or AI was like 5 years ago. So I mean, it's still pretty sexy, I think, to do now, but it's definitely not as sexy as it was 5 years ago. Still sexy, of course. Like if you can be a pretty big player in the space. Oh, hold on. Let me. I think Chad's on, so let me add him to the stream. All right, Chad. I'm gonna put you in. All right. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going? Sorry, I'm late. My Wi-Fi has been going in and out all day, so
Oh
I
yeah.
am now out of my office and in my bedroom.
Oh man, yeah. I've had a few of those moments where it's like I'm like, just like there was one day where I think it went out and in, and I just cancel all my meetings. I'm like, just assume I'm not around because I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah,
So,
perfect timing, always. Well, anyway, I'm happy to be here now.
yeah. Well, for everyone who doesn't know, Chad Sanderson, you're head of data at Convoy, which is, uh, you guys are at the unicorn status, past that, I think, right?
We
In terms
are,
of
we are,
valuation.
we are worth right around $4 billion right now.
Nice. So a lot of data. I think when we initially started talking, that's kind of like, I don't remember what the size of your data team was, but I remember it was a decent enough to be like that's a real data team kind of feel. It's not like
Mhm.
3 people. It's like, oh no, you've got multiple teams, you got data science teams, data engineering teams, and you're kind of managing all of it, right?
Yeah, well, sort of. So I manage the data platform team.
Okay.
And the data platform team focuses on mainly infrastructure, data engineering, and software engineering around infrastructure. The data science team, analyst team, and sort of machine learning engineers are actually a separate organization that are our customers, but I don't manage them directly.
Okay. Okay. But it's more just like, I guess, a large enough team to where it's like there's multiple data teams, which I think is not always the case for some of the teams I've worked with, where it's like, this is
Yes.
the one data team. They have like one data engineer, a data analyst, and maybe a data scientist or something like
Right.
that.
Right.
So, yeah. So dealing with a lot. Yeah. I don't know if you happen to get my questions, but that's where I'll kind of at least start here. I'll just ask you a few questions and then we'll kind of eventually transition into a more of a Q&A from the audience. Does that sound good?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right. So I usually like to start off with just something lighter, which is, when you're not doing data, what are you doing?
That's a good question. These days, I'm normally going to the gym, or I'm doing martial arts.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I'm actually a second degree Taekwondo black belt and a
Ooh.
second degree karate black belt. So, it's not a flex. It's just facts. But yeah,
Just facts. Oh, man. I thought you were going to say jujitsu, because I feel like that's
no.
like the trend. I think I recently only learned that Joe Reyes does just jujitsu. I don't remember what belt he's at, but
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, no,
yeah.
no. I started martial arts because I was bullied as an elementary schooler, not because I decided to take up a badass hobby later on in life.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, and I've definitely enjoyed my fair amount. It's a lot of fun. I've done like MMA, but it also, like, I think the one thing with, I don't know, I don't think you probably do this with Taekwondo or karate, or at least not as much, is like you get hit in the head a lot, and it's not, you start getting headaches, and you're like, maybe this isn't for me when I need to use my head.
Yeah, this is the money maker, right? You gotta just take it to the body.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, but yeah. All right, so from there, like, how did you get kind of into data?
Yeah, pretty interesting story. I actually spent the first 4 years of my career doing nothing associated with technology at all. I got my major in creative writing from Georgia Southern University. I got my bachelor's in creative writing, and then realized really quickly that was probably an incredibly unintelligent thing to do, given my inability to pay the bills with my poems. So, I actually got a minor in journalism. When I graduated school, I flew to Southeast Asia. I lived in Thailand, and I was actually a journalist over there. I bounced around in Southeast Asia for a pretty long time: Thailand, Singapore, China, and I was writing. I was doing journalism. I was doing a little bit of marketing. And that was actually when I first started getting into analytics through, I was doing like social media analytics, just as it was sort of bundled in with a broader job I was doing. I realized, like, oh yeah, this is pretty nice. And then when I was doing that, I was made a job offer in Asia for like 4 times my salary. I was like, oh, I didn't I didn't realize that's how things were. I thought everybody was underpaid like me. So when I came back to the US, I decided to go into data full time. I started off working at like a really, really small company in northern Georgia as an analyst. I transitioned more to like doing conversion rate optimization, and from there, it's kind of the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah, you were living the Tokyo Vice life, which I don't know if you've watched that show on HBO, but that's kind of the premise. A guy
I
goes
have
to
not, but that sounds pretty accurate. Yeah.
went to Japan to be a journalist. But you're also living the life I lived before I, like, 16 to 20. I basically was like, I'm gonna do fine dining. This is gonna be my life. And at 20, I had that same realization where I was like, this pay sucks.
Yeah.
Like, I love this thing, but this pay is terrible. So I went back and finished the last 2 years of my college. And yeah, now I'm in data. Well, there's one more thought I had there now. Oh, I was gonna say, the one nice thing with writing is I feel like it's definitely paid off in terms of your writing. Every time
Mm.
I've kind of read any of your posts or your newsletter, I think you definitely capture attention well. So I think that's always hard to do. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. All right. So since you kind of had an interesting kind of path into data, most people I think assume it's like you must have a CS degree, you must have like some sort of background. How do you recommend people kind of get into data, essentially?
Um, yeah, So I think the biggest recommendation that I have is to, at least for me, as someone coming from a non-technical background, I first thought about what are the innate skill sets that I already have, and if I wanted to go into data, how would I be able to best apply those skill sets?
Hmm.
I saw that there was actually a gap in the market and a relatively strong demand for people who didn't just have the sort of technical skills to like write SQL queries and answer business questions and things like that, but they actually got really, really deep into sort of first principles thinking and then looking at even small amounts of data to actually decide on solutions, rolling out different versions of those solutions, and then measuring the impacts between
Hmm.
two versions. So that was experimentation, A/B testing. I ended up becoming an A/B testing specialist. So I was sort of akin to a data scientist at one point. Like I was doing a lot of statistics. I taught myself statistics from nothing. I bought a book called R for Statistics, and
Oh
I
yeah.
read the whole thing cover to cover. I applied some like basic hypothesis testing, and that was it. I was basically good to go at that point. And I think the reason that that succeeded was because I picked a niche, and the niche was A/B testing. I picked that niche because it fell in line with skill sets that I had. And then when you're in a niche in data that's in demand, it's just so much easier to break in and to move sort of up the career ladder.
Yeah, I think that makes sense in terms of like, eh, I feel like that's in a lot of spaces. I feel like there's a lot of people who, like when you first start out, like you want to do everything, but I think if you start specializing, you kind of have to do a little both. Like specialize, yes, but like if you can talk very deeply about one thing and then like talk deep enough about the other things, I think that usually kind of translates well. Um, so I'm curious then, like, were there any skills you think in particular helped you, or you think it was beyond just AB, or any other skills that kind of helped you stand out in your career, I guess?
Honestly, I think the writing was probably my biggest value proposition whenever I was interviewing for data roles.
Yeah.
To come in and say, "Look, I'm a really, really good writer," and by extension, that means that I'm actually extremely good at communicating complex ideas,
Yeah.
and not just communicating complex ideas, but for journalism specifically, you have to be good at telling a narrative, like telling a
Yeah.
story. And that's the type of skill that can take a team, especially like a data engineering team, from kind of being irritated all the time and not really getting to work on the projects they want to work on, to getting to do every single thing that they want. It doesn't have anything at all to do with the level of technical sophistication of the team members. It's just a sales process.
Yeah.
Like how well can you sell these ideas to leadership? And that comes from being able to tell compelling narratives. And so because I could do that, a lot of people recognize that as a skill that would benefit their team pretty well.
Yeah. I think I've been trying to figure out a way to communicate this, but like, you know, I always see like, especially if you're in like engineering, you have this desire to kind of learn like lateral skills. You know, it's like, okay, I know data engineering. Now I want to learn, machine learning. Now I want to learn, all these things, which, at a certain point, you just run into a limit on how like scalable that is, like how much impact you're going to drive, and like then you have to start kind of moving up this ladder of like you said, being able to communicate, being able to sell an idea, being able to get buy-in, because
Mhm.
that drives in a lot more impact than just like, hey, I by myself can do this, instead of being like, hey, me on a team or me leading this team can do all this other stuff because I can get the buy-in, I can get the right people involved, I can get them excited about it, I can get you excited about it, and then things move in the right direction, which it's it's an interesting kind of concept, because I think, again, we think technical skills are hard, so we should learn those. But like honestly, moving up that ladder is it's harder if you don't have these other skills.
Yeah, I mean, to put it another way, like we've talked a lot recently, and it's sort of it's a common theme in like the data influencer space to talk about these like data as a product, right?
Yeah.
But maybe an extension of that, or a similar abstraction, is like a person as a product. You are selling yourself to a business, and in that way, the company is the customer,
Yeah.
and you have to think like, what is it that this company actually needs? Like, what's the MVP version of this of the skill sets that I can provide in order to be an extremely compelling hire? And an MVP, if you provide like an MVP product to a set of customers and you only have like a really good developer experience, but there's no interface, it's going to be real hard for you to sell that. So even having like a basic interface and a less sort of detailed developer experience, you can probably sell like 100 times more. And it kind of applies here too. Like to your point, maybe instead of investing in 50 different, really deep technical skills, you actually pick 2 or 3 and you get really excellent at like communicating ideas and writing and salesmanship and stuff like that. And maybe that can get you in the door like way more frequently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I kind of answered my next question, which is like, how do you grow in data roles? But I think that kind of covers a lot of it.
Well, sort of. So I do think that sort of, I do think that sort of, like writing and like going down this road of soft skills is really important. But what I would say, at least I can tell you what was important for my career, because like I said, I started as an experimentation specialist and now I run all of data for Convoy. And the way that I did that really was by putting myself into extremely uncomfortable situations where I didn't know anything and trying to contribute value as much as I possibly could. So when I took over the experimentation platform team over at Convoy, I understood that very well. That's what I had been working on pretty much my entire career. I helped build out the internal experimentation platform at Microsoft. And there was this big gap on the machine learning team. I didn't know anything about machine learning at that time, but there was no sort of strategic leadership. People were kind of throwing a bunch of features and products at the wall. It wasn't really sticking. I was like, okay, I don't understand this space. There's a really good likelihood that if I asked to transition over here, like 50% of my time, I could fail and that's going to look bad on me. But if it succeeds, now I'm in a completely different role. Now I'm sort of the owner of the artificial intelligence platform or something. And I just kept doing that until eventually I had ownership over the whole data stack.
Yeah, for anyone out there, if you see a piece of anything, I don't know, like I feel like I also read an article similar to that about a Facebook engineer who's making like $1 million or $2 million a year, and that was kind of a similar premise where it's like I saw a thing, I saw that was like left behind, I improved the thing, that thing started adding to the bottom line, then they paid me $2 million a year. And if you ever see a problem and that even if you don't know the solution, if you were the person to solve it, that generally looks good.
Right.
Very hard to do though, but yes, I totally agree with that. All right, now kind of like going up to 10,000 feet because I think one reason you've kind of stood out. I feel like maybe you spent, was it maybe last year you kind of spent a lot of time fielding a ton of information, and then like this year you started like sharing a lot, right? Like, so I guess my first question is like, what issues did you kind of run into that made you kind of start like being more vocal about current data practices? What were you kind of seeing both internally and externally that kind of drove this?
Yeah, well, so actually back in December of 2020, we had this really big problem within our data science team. And there was a lot of conflict between data engineers and data consumers, like data scientists, analysts, ML engineers, where the data scientists were always complaining about data quality. They had really important tables that were always like breaking. No one really knew who had ownership on some of the most important sort of concepts of our business represented through data. And when they would come to us, they would come to our data engineering team. People would say, hey, I want you to take ownership over this table. And the data engineering team, I would say, well, I don't think that we can do that. We're a centralized team. We were brought in to own the infrastructure. My team doesn't have any business context on this thing that you have created. You wrote the code for this. So why is it so hard for you to take ownership over it, right? Like any other, if you talk to any other software engineer that is writing code and is building scalable, maintainable systems, they would never say, hey, I wrote something that has a lot of tech debt. Now I need like another centralized team to come over and like take ownership, right? That's just not how it works. And so that it didn't really make sense to me, but that problem was coming up over and over and over and over again. So in sort of January, February of 2021, I decided to go out and ask a bunch of other companies that were way more mature, or I thought they were more mature compared to Convoy in terms of their data infrastructure. And I was like, surely if I talk to all these people, eventually I will find someone that has solved this problem. And I couldn't find one. I talked to Facebook, I talked to Netflix, I talked to Uber, I talked to companies around Convoy size, I talked to way bigger companies, and everyone basically said the way that we solve this is just by adding a ton of headcount. We
Yeah.
hired an enormous amount of data engineers, and we essentially threw them, over the wall into the fire to solve these like pipeline problems and ownership problems as they emerged.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the luxury to do that. We had 6 data engineers on our team,
Yeah.
and it took us 3 to 6 months to hire one additional headcount. And
Yeah.
so to say, yeah, well, just add another data engineer for every product team, like that's you're talking about 8 or 9 years based on our current trajectory, right? So,
Yeah.
so I did a lot of thinking with thought leaders about these types of problems, where they're starting from, what are the root causes, and I just realized this was an enormous gap in the industry, and nobody was really talking about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really why I started writing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, you saw a problem and you're like, I'm gonna try to start figuring out a solution. So I think that's again just a great habit to build in general. Again, just going back to my chef like cooking days. I once worked for a chef and like I think I brought him a problem and he's like, Ben, cooks kind of like bring problems to the chef. Like chefs like have solutions. So I think that always translates. Like you can be the person that's like, hey, this is a problem and point at it, or you can be like, hey, this is a problem. Here's the solution, or here's what I'm thinking. So I
Yeah.
think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that it's something I really recommend data engineers to do. It's and I don't think it's necessarily always their fault for thinking this way, because it's so easy to get trained on a sort of call response sort of work life cycle, right? We got a ticket, now we go solve that ticket, we finish the ticket, and now we move on to sort of the next thing.
Yeah.
Whereas what I sort of ask the data engineers on my team to do is like, listen, if the tickets pile up, that's okay. And if someone yells at you, you can tell them to come yell at me. That's fine. But what I would rather you do is to say, listen, we're getting 30 of the same type of ticket every single quarter. Why
Yeah.
is that happening? And how can we fix it? And then we go and put together a plan. We write up a strategy. We go to sell it to the business, and we say, listen, like worst case scenario, in terms of a pitch, we're spending 5 data engineers' time, like 30% of their time every single quarter, responding to this type of problem. That results in like X million dollars being wasted. We should get that time back to go focus on more valuable things.
Yeah.
So that's sort of my framework for how to, identify these problems and solve them.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Again, just like the gamification of like getting promoted at like Facebook is a thing. And one of the things my manager was like, Ben, this is how you do it. You find, are there 1,000 tickets coming in every half that you have to do? Get rid of those 1,000 tickets in one move. Like it's like, oh yeah,
Yes.
that makes sense. Yeah, that's super impactful. How do you get rid of these 1,000 tickets and just not make them a problem? So yeah. I think the other thing I think you've written about is kind of this reference of like maybe old. I say old more as like veteran people who've been doing this for a while in terms of data people and
Mm,
then newer thinking people. So do you feel like we're kind of like, because if you ask people who've been doing this forever, they're just gonna say we're just cycling through the third cycle. It was like on
yeah.
prem, then it was the cloud plus Hadoop, then now we're kind of in the Snowflake Databricks era.
Mhm.
Do you feel like we're just kind of cycling back to like remembering what data practices were, or where's things kind of like floating to you?
Yes, I think yes and no. I
Yeah.
think that there are, horseshoe theory is real, and I think that we are certainly sort of at the middle point of the horseshoe when it comes to some forgotten quote unquote concepts like great data modeling and semantic design and true data warehouses and data marts and things like that. But on the other hand, I think that there are unique and interesting properties of cloud data warehouses that folks from 20, 30 years ago didn't really have to deal with.
Yeah.
And the systems and processes and frameworks that they developed do not actually do a great job scaling to solve those problems. And that's one of the reasons why they haven't been adopted. So as an example, in the old days, when you had a sort of a governance system in place, it was a relatively small team that acted as a bottleneck for the data. They spent a lot of time sort of thinking about the data model and building ERDs and things like that. And nowadays, the modern business, especially if you're in a startup like Convoy, you cannot wait for a small group of folks to bottleneck your data intake, especially when core aspects of the business are driven on machine learning, which requires larger and larger volumes of data. The value of putting bad data and unmodeled data into a machine learning model that generates hundreds of millions of dollars is much higher than taking your time to like slowly build out, the right infrastructure. And now some people might say, well, no, I disagree with that, because if you build out the right infrastructure first, then you're going to get a lot of value later. That is true. But a leader of the business is not going to see it that way. They're always going to see every prioritization, every quarter as an opportunity to invest in either speed or invest in, additional growth and revenue and things like that. They just have to weigh their options. And if they have very clear revenue targets that they're trying to hit over the next 6 months, and one team is promising them, yes, we will allow you to hit those revenue targets, and the other team is saying, yeah, we probably won't hit the revenue targets because we're going to ask you to slow down, that's like a very easy choice for them. So that, my opinion is that all of these methods are probably correct, right? Like I would say, I mean, they're definitely correct, but they need to be applied to the modern frameworks. They need to work for the modern tech companies in the cloud, and I don't think there's great systems of doing that yet.
Yeah, I think just so we have a quick, like, because someone asked, if you wouldn't mind, what is this horseshoe theory? Just if you want to kind of explain that.
Oh, horseshoe theory. Yeah, sorry. So horseshoe theory essentially means, like, if you come up with some idea or some concept, it will go through an evolution over time as people try to like optimize it and make it better, and they learn new things. But if that idea was pretty well thought out from day one, more than likely you're going to end right back where you started. You're going to realize that the original idea was probably more or less correct. You may have some new information, but a lot of those like core values are the same. That's kind of what's happening in data, right? We started all of this with like great data modeling and strong semantic design and clear connection to business value. And then we said, well, you know what really matters is, high volume data. It's getting a lot of data from a lot of different places, and that means sort of making this transition to the cloud, and that allows us to cut costs. So cost optimization like really matters, and maybe that matters even more than the semantics. And then we sort of arrived in like, actually what matters is, being able to get data from a bunch of different sources. Like you need data from first-party databases and, third-party tools like a Mixpanel and the CDP. And you also need data from like Google Analytics and all these other random places. And now we're kind of getting to the point where there's so much data and it's not modeled very well, and there's not very clear ownership, that it turns out that the having good semantic design and data modeling is actually the right thing to do, and it would prevent a lot of these problems from happening.
Yeah, I agree. I think you also brought up the other point that I'm always kind of thinking about, which is like, some like you said, like doing some of these processes can be really slow, and I think for enterprise companies, they're kind of accustomed to being slower, and so like you can sometimes be like, let's set up an MDM process and data governance, and we're gonna take a year just to do that. Mm-hmm. For an SMB or a startup, you can't, right? Like it's like if you told your manager like, hey, I'm gonna take a year to be, I'm not going to deliver anything. I'm just going to set up a program to make sure we have like accurate data. They would like laugh at you and fire you. They'd be like, okay, next person, because right. It's just not like, So yeah, I think that's kind of the interesting thing I've been thinking about is like, how do you find the balance for different companies of different sizes to make sure you have good data governance at a company that is, only 20 data engineers or, 10 data scientists and 20. So I think that's kind of where we're at, I assume. Trying to figure that out.
I think you're right about that. It's something I've been thinking about as well, where, I one of the tools, I've written about this a little bit, but one of the tools that I really like in the DevOps space is GitHub. And I don't just like GitHub because, it facilitates source control. Like that's kind of the core technology, yes. Yeah. But the real value proposition of GitHub to me, relative to other source control tools, is that it allows it allows for the iterative and safe evolution of the code base. It's peer reviewed. It's fast. You can bring in the right people. You don't have to worry about designing this incredibly complex system from day one. It can sort of it can evolve in an iterative, healthy way. And I think we don't really have something like that in data. Like we don't have that for the data model. To your point, the data model gets set up, pretty early in a company's existence. Oftentimes, it's not even set up by data engineers. It's just set up by like software engineers. Yeah. And people kind of tack things onto it over time. There's not a clear ownership model. And then you have, 5 or 10 data engineers that get hired and they say, listen, go and clean this up. And they're just immediately flooded with this like deluge of service tickets, and they never get the chance to bring themselves out of it. But in that, if they were software engineers in that analogy, they would just come in and say, oh, there's pieces of the data model that we should change. Maybe we should add this foreign key here and that foreign key there, or maybe we should re-instrument a particular event or a particular sort of dimensional table or whatever it is. And it can evolve in an iterative way, and that just doesn't really exist.
Yeah, you're making me think of like Airbnb's kind of infrastructure, because, or not infrastructure, but like they had an article that I remember reading where like they kind of explained that. They're like, so like whatever, forever ago, we had data scientists and software engineers build our data pipelines. That was great, but now we realize we need better, like, I think they talked about ownership is like one of their points and all these other things. Mm-hmm. And they're like, so we hired a bunch of data engineers and threw them at the problem. And they're like, you fixed this problem we have now created. Like, and again, it's kind of like, it makes sense. Like when you first start out, you don't have time to like, set everything up the right way, but like, it is interesting just kind of watching this. So I'd be curious to kind of see like, what tool kind of fits that niche or that need. Which, speaking of, like my kind of last question here before maybe we go into more of a Q&A is,
mm-hmm.
Where do you see kind of the data world going in 5 years? I used to ask 10 years, but I realized that's impossible. So it's like, no one knows that.
Yeah. I definitely think that, to your earlier point, we are going to see ourselves moving back towards really strong data modeling, strong semantic design, and honestly, just a connection to business workflows and life cycles that doesn't exist today. I was just talking about this with one of my data engineers last week, and we realized that a lot of the folks who were asking for data or were trying to do some analytics didn't even understand how the business worked. Like if they we sort of understand our little piece of it in our silo, like, oh yeah, this is how my thing works. But businesses are not just our little things by themselves. We are part of a much larger process.
Yeah.
And when you don't understand how the company actually works, it become really, really challenging not to build a tech debt fueled data model. So I think that's going to make a comeback. And then the other thing I think is going to become really popular, I hope, is collaboration, data collaboration. Again, I sort of referenced GitHub, but there's other sort of tools. It doesn't necessarily need to be a tool, but just sort of my mental model around these things is like Figma, GitHub, where like these central locations where people from different teams can come together and say, oh, like there's actually an important design process that's happening right now, right? Yeah. We're not purely writing code. We're not purely doing engineering. We're also doing design. And if the design is bad, then you might get tech debt either way, but you probably will get a lot more tech debt. And I find that like design process in the modern tech company is pretty absent. People just write SQL queries or they use dbt, and that's awesome. And someone might come in and say, yeah, the business logic looks fine, but no one ever really sits down and says, hey, this is actually a design exercise, and we need to go through that as a team.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I can definitely say that's what it feels like sometimes when you go into some things. I think the way like I usually think about it is like, especially like when you come up to people who are more analytical or like an analyst type role, they generally build for a like single purpose, right? Like it's like, I need to build this report. So they build everything for that in a very like straight line. And it's not very like, if you then ask for it to do something else, it's not going to do it, right? Because that's not what it was designed for. It was designed for this one thing to be good at this one thing, and then it works until you now have 50,000 tables and none of them really connect and they're all their own little thing. And your team is now being asked to maintain 50,000 tables, and you're like, how would
Right.
you like me to maintain 50,000 tables with 6 data engineers? How do you think that's possible?
And at that point, the number of people who are taking dependencies on those 50,000 tables is like the rest of the company, right? So
yes.
you can't just say no,
Yeah.
or else the everyone else's analytics is going to break.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I think it makes sense. And I've really enjoyed all of your insights, and I'll keep reading. I'm gonna see if there's any Q&A kind of coming in. People usually here range from mostly, I'd say, people who are just getting into the industry. So you'll kind of see a lot of questions, I think, that fit that role.
Sure.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's try this one. So, I mean, I think this one, since you're hiring people, might be interesting. So, would a degree in information technology help getting into data eng compared to maybe someone coming from CS?
Yeah, it certainly could. So I'll tell you the types of folks that we hire in data engineering at Convoy. We definitely have several people that have computer science background. They were data engineers at bigger companies like Microsoft, where like if you wanted to be a data engineer at Microsoft, at least when I was there, you generally have to have a computer science degree. But if someone came in with an information technology degree, if they sort of understood good like data warehousing principles, if they at least had some firm grasp on like one or two languages, like Python, SQL, something like that. I think that would be a strong potential hire. What's really important to me is a coupling of the technologies. Like, do you know how to build things? Are you an engineer? Do you know how to build things in a safe, scalable way? And then, do you know how to think about designing data ecosystems in a healthy way? Those are really the three sort of attributes that I look for. And if you know how to do that, I do not discriminate too much between like IT degrees and CS degrees.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And at a certain point, right, like experience is going to trump everything anyways. So that's how I usually view it. It's like, look, yes, obviously CS can have some benefits, but at a certain point, once you're doing the thing, you're doing the thing.
Right.
Let's see. Let's go to something that's more on, I think, communication. The question here is like, listening to you makes it sound like you're working with lots of teams, makes communication and ownership hard. Can you share a good learning experience that you've had?
Sure. And the answer is yes, absolutely. It makes ownership and communication incredibly hard. This is one of the things that they do not teach you about in school, or really sort of any program or many programs. When you learn a technical skill, is that a huge portion of the work is being able to effectively talk to other people, understand what their problems are, and then derive like some insight from the thing that they said, even if they don't even know how to directly ask you for what they need. So I would say that one of my biggest insights in that theme, in that sort of question and answer theme, was we made a big technical assumption when I was working on our machine learning platform at Convoy. And essentially, we heard that it was really painful for data scientists to create and maintain features for their machine learning models.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought about building like this whole infrastructure. We had a long pipeline. It took a long time for us to build. It was like 8 months of work, but we are so sure this is going to deliver like this really awesome, high quality outcome. And it relied on Kafka, which is essentially a streaming framework. And you would query a Kafka topic in order to generate these features. And the problem was we didn't have a whole lot of Kafka topics. Okay. And I didn't realize until we had actually implemented that pipeline that it was incredibly difficult for people to get more Kafka streams into our pipeline. Like that in itself was another problem which we hadn't solved. We solved the machine learning pipeline problem. We hadn't solved the actual like getting data into the pipeline problem. And I think if I had if I had gone further in my communication, if I had asked people better questions instead of just asking them, hey, what's the thing that you need right now? If I thought more about the end-to-end experience that needed to exist in order to deliver this outcome that they needed right now, I wouldn't have made that mistake.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's I guess it's always interesting when you never know what problems are gonna what problems are gonna occur and where and when. So yeah, I can see that.
Yes.
This question's more just funny. Where can we apply?
Where
Are
can
you hiring?
I absolutely am applying. Hold on. I can I drop a link somewhere?
If you can't, I can definitely. So maybe LinkedIn it, and then I'll share it or something.
Okay, well, we have a Convoy careers page, which I'm going to put into the chat. You can see that. Does that just go to the private chat? Is there a public chat?
You might want to try LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn does this annoying, or not LinkedIn, YouTube does this annoying thing that if I post a link, it's fine, but if anyone else posts a link, it's like no.
Oh, really?
Even though I swear it doesn't get rid of any of like the scammy links. I'm like, why does it get like if someone posts a Discord link, it always gets blocked. But
okay,
every
well,
time
I will post a link in YouTube.
Okay.
If you want to go there before I post the link, it's just convoy.com/careers.
Perfect.
So we absolutely have openings for business analysts, data engineers, and if there's a role that you want that you don't see, you can just reach out to me directly.
Perfect. Okay, so next question. In a startup with a small data team, so less than 5 people, how do you decide what to prioritize, especially in terms of new features versus fixing existing issues?
Yeah, that is a really hard that's a really hard question because it depends on you're sort of in an interesting position. Not many folks that are in startups are thinking too much about the long-term future.
Mm-hmm.
They're mainly thinking about what's happening right now, right? Can we make enough money to last another day? Can we land this big customer that will allow me to go to a VC and raise, another $20 million so that we can hire 30 more people or whatever it is. And us as data people, we do have to think a lot more about infrastructure. So what I would do is I would probably bias towards solving business problems as best as you possibly can, and maybe in a sneaky way, trying to inject good data engineering fundamentals into that process while you do it. Sometimes fundamentals and foundations have to come at the cost of speed and building new features, but it is a balance. And I think as long as you represent that balance fairly to your employers or the CEO or whoever it might be, people are pretty receptive as long as it doesn't come at like a major cost to speed. As the company starts to grow, that balance will start to ideally shift back more towards the center. And as you get really big, it starts to shift sort of the other direction, right? Where you're spending a lot more of your time on like fixing issues and foundational work.
Yeah, no, it's unavoidable. It's I mean, like if you work at a big tech company, you'll find that out pretty quickly. It's like, oh, I'm doing less time building new things and spending more time just maintaining and keeping things running. So
which can be really boring, by the way. Don't just accept that. So
it can be. Oh, is that as another kind of subtle pitch? Why not work for a smaller company and build all the new fun things? That's very true. All right. So, favorite data engineering tools? Do you have anything currently?
I think DBT is excellent. I think honestly, there's a lot of modern tools I think are really cool. If you've never heard of Materialize, it's sort of like a SaaS, stream processing database. That's really great.
Okay.
There's actually 2 other products I think are super cool. Not just these like specific products, but kind of the space.
Mm-hmm.
The first is metrics repos. I've been doing a lot of thinking about that. So this is like, instead of just creating tables and then, slapping a dashboard directly on top of a table and sort of letting people go to town. You create a specific metric. So you write some SQL that captures a fact like number of shipments per year or something like that. In SQL, you add some YAML, so it's like some metadata to describe what is this fact. And then the metrics repository is going to produce an endpoint, like an API, and you can hit that endpoint and you can fetch, the latest value of that particular metric, and you can cut it by all the dimensions that you have. So it unlocks some really great self-service functionality in the business, which we're starting to roll it out in more places at Convoy.
Nice. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Will we see that as a new startup anytime soon?
Oh no, I'm not building it. I'm using a startup.
For some reason I thought you. Okay. Yeah, I misheard that. That'd be. I'm always curious, right? Because like there's all, a lot of these things have always come out of, I feel like, some other company, right? Uber's built things, and someone built a startup, and so that makes sense. Let's see. So for hiring, what would you say fundamental skills are you looking for if you're hiring a junior data engineer? And do you feel like you hire at that level, or do you kind of just try to go for mid?
Yeah, we generally don't. Our team is so small that hiring junior data engineers would be a pretty large cost center for us.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, when you say junior, I'm sort of meaning like entry level. If we're talking junior as in a couple years experience, now that's something we do hire.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, we do. We always sort of bias on previous work experience. So if you've had like a nice internship somewhere, that's always great. Great data engineering fundamentals are really, really important. Then in terms of languages, like I said, data engineering is like data plus software engineering. So SQL plus something like Python is usually really excellent. That's part of Convoy's like technology stack. Having like deep Python experience is not necessarily a blocker, but we are looking for people who have like the software engineering mindset and at least a partial like software engineering background.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. So this one was kind of, I think you may not have explicitly answered this, but so this person's asking, at my company, there seems to be an issue with data quality ownership across analysts, data engineers, and data scientists. How do you guys think about data quality ownership at Convoy?
Well, no other chance. You are certainly not alone. Like I was sort of mentioning this at the beginning of the conversation, but when I went and talked to really big organizations, they hadn't solved this ownership problem. And there's a lot of reasons why this ownership problem happens. One of the big reasons is, at least in Convoy's case, a huge amount of our data, probably 95 to 99%, is coming from our first-party systems. So like our production databases in Postgres. We need to know what is the status of any shipment, what's the status of all of our shippers, what about contracts, what about requests for pricing. We mapped this out almost a year and a half ago, and we have over 130 entities that are being analyzed or like leveraged somewhere at any point in time. And these entities, all of this entity data is generated by software engineering teams that are fundamentally isolated from the data organization, right? They're off building services. We then use like ELT. We grab a whole bunch of data from these databases and we throw it into our like data environments. Like we use Snowflake. This is actually a very big problem because then it's not clear who owns anything. Yeah. Right? No one, if it's not the software engineer that's generating that data, technically nobody owns it, right? Yeah. Like if I'm a data engineer and I say, well, yeah, I'm going to build this table off of all this data that's coming from my production systems, and then other people will take dependencies on it. If that breaks because someone upstream decided to rename a column or drop a column, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
But I'm still going to be blamed because I took ownership over that table.
Yeah.
Right. So we actually identified this as one of the core issues, is that the true owners of the data should be the producer. The producers should be the ones that take ownership. So this is what we've shifted to at Convoy, where our producers, our software engineers, are actually accountable for the data sets that they generate in our source layer within Snowflake. The data team then in each particular organization. So let's say I'm part of the shipper team. My software engineering team is generating data sets about shippers. We may have like a shipper dimensional table. My data team is then responsible for any of the sort of core aggregations / like data marts that we built on top of that shipper's data. So if anything in the warehouse breaks, we know we can go to that data team. The data team can go to the software engineering team. The software engineering team is fundamentally accountable at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, that always just brings me back to like Facebook. I mean, like, and this is again more than just Facebook, but you know, it was like the way I think I viewed it is like software engineers, like they get their promotions based on the fact that they're changing things and making things happen. So if you add another layer and say like, hey, you need to tell someone or you need to do something, they're very much like, no, I just want to make this change. And like for them, it's like, I just want, like, if the application works, why do I care? Right? Like my job is to make this thing function. Everything else is secondary. I think eventually Facebook just like set up a system that would like check entities. And if the entities changed and your table was like, or your pipeline was connected, it would just like send you a message like, hey, by the way, that column's now an int. It was a varchar, now an int. Right. Fun fact. So you better change your pipeline. So that was kind of how we had to kind of do it. Cause it's just like, yeah, let's, in general, software engineers are like, I just want to make it work. Data, who cares?
we legitimately went out, talked to our CTO, and said, "That's dumb." That's basically what we said. We basically went to our CTO and said, "This doesn't make sense. Our the most important model, the most important revenue generating surface in our entire business are the machine learning models that are built on top of data that the software engineers don't fundamentally care about. That makes no sense." So we essentially convinced them to say, look, treat your data as an API. We'll give you the tools to do that. But like, yeah, that's it. Like it's something, it's you own that now. And I think until folks get to that point, and without implementing a system like you described, where it's like, yeah, okay, we'll tell you when things have changed, and then you can good luck. I think it's gonna be hard to beat the system where like the folks who are the most upstream actually take accountability of it.
Yeah. Okay, going more to just going back to fundamentals. What do you consider to be the data engineering kind of fundamentals for people that they should know?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So for me, when I say data engineering fundamentals, I'm really talking about how do you properly design data ecosystems. I'm not sort of focused on any particular framework. Like, do you know what a data mart is? Do you know what data vault is? But just having some idea of, okay, this is how we do dimensional modeling. This is how we should think about like constructing a dimensional table versus like a fact table. Why should we organize something in this like particular way? If I give you a scenario like, hey, like this is the data that we're trying to collect, like how would you do that? Do you know how to build a pipeline? How would you ensure that pipeline is like relatively high quality, or like how would you think about making sure that if it breaks, about it? Like those are the types of things. When I say fundamentals, I'm talking about like organization of the data ecosystem, pipeline development, and then some of the infrastructure that like surrounds that.
Yeah, no, I think that's like, if you have that and then you can just prove that it's like you can write some SQL, you can write some Python, it's like perfect.
Exactly.
Perfect. Like, right, like you understand the high level, you understand how to actually implement it. That's what's needed, I assume, for most people.
Yes.
Okay, so this question is a little more interesting. So this person, I guess, has worked in government, academia. I'm getting tired of the lack of promotion and potential pay cap. How do I sell myself to convince private businesses that I will add value? Any thoughts?
Well, I could give you a specific answer if I knew a little bit more about your situation, but so in lieu of that, I can give you more of a generic answer. I think that even listen, even if a business puts out a job description and that job description has a whole bunch of like, oh, you need to have 6 years of Python, you need to have 2 years of like Java, you need to have a 1 year of like COBOL, like whatever, whatever sort of like years of experience with languages they put out, that's the thing that gets you in the door. But what's really compelling to hiring managers, and I know this because I am a hiring manager, is when you're able to tell a narrative, tell a story through your resume and through your interview about why you're going to add like value, distinct value. A lot of people can do that just through their experience, right? That's the narrative. The narrative is, hey, listen, I've been doing this for 30 years. So I've seen a lot of things. I've set up a lot of systems. Like that's sort of the that's sort of the implication of the experience, right? The implication is I've done a lot of this stuff, and therefore I'm going to be able to do it for you as well across this like wide variety of scenarios that maybe you can't predict or expect. I think you need to do something similar based on your particular background. So if you've been in government and in academia, I don't know about government, but if you've been in academia, I've imagined that you've applied some like really you've applied some critical thought to some really complex problems that are like hyper specific. And the mental model, like your workflow when doing that was like, okay, I have to go and do some research. I have to go do research for 1 or 2 months. I have to, get approval that like this is a smart paper to write. You have to like write down all these details. I don't know how it works. I was, I did a BA in creative writing, so don't look to me on that type of stuff. All I'm saying is you have unique experiences, you have unique skills. Package that in a way that somebody like me that's looking for data engineering fundamentals, someone that can, contribute to a team, someone that can help add value to my organization would really appreciate. Like I said, sort of at the beginning of the conversation, the way that I did that was by relying on my writing. Right, this is a unique value proposition that I can add that really nobody else can. I think if you can do that, you're going to have a lot of success.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Okay, I think this one hopefully should be interesting. How does understanding the overall business better help drive the design of the data environment? How would you go about gaining that understanding? Because this person feels like he's quite siloed at the moment.
Yeah, great question. So I will give you a real world example of that. Okay, so we had at Convoy, we have a service that sends out emails. So this is like a product that we bought, and we built sort of a service around this product that sort of helps manage the orchestration of emails. There's like a lot of different emails that we send out. We send emails to shippers, we send emails to customers that are taking loads, we send emails at like many different times. And we have a team, and that team focuses on, among other things, analysis of email data. We want to understand, like, of all the emails that we're sending out, what percentage of them are actually leading to good outcomes? Should we be changing the frequency of our emails, and so on and so forth, right? One day, this data scientist that was doing this analysis came to me and he said, hey, I have a really big problem. The problem is I am not able to connect any particular email being sent or received to a business outcome. And the reason that I can't do that is because I'm not collecting the shipment ID or the ticket ID or anything related to a customer outcome in the actual email sent event. And so what that person then had to do is write a whole bunch of, essentially had to do like fuzzy modeling to guess, right? Okay, we sent an email at this time to this customer, and here's all the shipments that we were doing for this customer this time. And so maybe we were actually talking about shipment 1, 2, 3, and this had that particular outcome. And that took them months to put together all of that infrastructure, right? But imagine if you understood how the business worked from early on, right? You understood that when you send emails, then we receive an email. You have an ops person that responds to it. An ops person files a ticket. The ticket goes into our service desk. The ticket gets resolved. And then we connect that to like the status of the shipment completes. If you understand how all of these various entities connect together, then you can model them in such a way that it becomes trivial to get to those answers, right?
Yeah.
Writing the joins to go from email to service ticket to shipment is a 5-minute problem instead of a 6-month problem. So in terms of the second part of your question, which is how would you gain that understanding, I have some bad news for you. and, and the bad news is you just have to talk to people. Right? There is no way of understanding the business unless your team has amazing documentation somewhere, which I find almost never happens. You have to get out and you have to go speak to people. You have to understand how that particular part of the business works, and you have to connect that to the data. If you're in a very siloed environment, one thing I recommend doing is you can build almost like a semi ERD in your head or on paper, right? You can just say, hey, here's my little team. Here's the entities that we care about. And here's sort of the first order entities that we associate with. Go understand those relationships. And then once you understand those relationships, like you will begin to figure out how you should rethink your data model, or how you should start to optimize it for other use cases.
Yeah, I think I literally wrote a post about that because I had a client with that situation where it was something very simple. Like they just need to know different categories of customers. And could you have probably written a model to detect the differences? Yes, I had a conversation. Like no one knew what the data model was because this is like some offshoot, ERP system that is, there's 20 customers too. So I just contacted them. I was like, how do you guys do this? And they're like, oh, here's the logic. I was like, okay. Yeah. That saved me like $20,000 worth of time. So thank you.
Exactly.
So, it's like talking to people is always, it needs to happen. Sadly, it could save a ton of time.
Yes.
Okay. So this question comes up, I think, every time, and I should make a compilation of this. Just like basically, which cloud platform do you prefer? You can answer for the ETL or just in general. Which cloud platform do you prefer? Do you have a preference you recommend people learn?
I honestly have no preference. If I could recommend one to learn, I would say AWS, just because it's the most used, and only for that reason.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I think I've heard, or at least I usually am like, I don't care personally. That's my answer. Last time I think I got asked this, the person answered AWS because it's arguably the most kind of convoluted. So if you figure that one out, the other ones might be a little bit easier. So I was like, yeah, that also makes sense. That also makes sense. That's funny. Let's see. Someone also answered shouldn't the person have contacted me instead of creating a fussy solution?
Should they have done that? Absolutely. Absolutely, they should have done that. But what you will find when you have very large organizations of people acting independently and often irrationally, you'll see some crazy stuff happen. The other thing that I'll sort of point out is that in many cases there is no SME. And this is actually one of those cases where the engineer who implemented this particular service, he doesn't know how all these other things integrate. Like his job was, we send emails. Let's figure out how to send emails. So and then all the other teams, like let's say your shipments team, or the team that's focusing on the facility, right? They're building out geofences so that they can detect when a shipment arrives, and we want to send an email when that happens. Like the facilities team has no idea how we send emails. The shipments team has no idea how we send emails. So I think there's a lot of situations where you are going to be the subject matter expert, and you can only attain that subject matter expertise by talking to people and potentially having to build your own solution.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, speaking on that, my manager at Facebook was always just like, even before adding a case statement into a SQL clause, he's like, can we avoid that? It's like, before we do that, can you go talk to them to see if they can add that logic into their, their software side? Because that's one more thing we now have to maintain in two places, essentially.
That's right.
So even doing a basic case statement, it's like, can you avoid it? If you can, do it, because again, then you have to update it whenever something changes. And yeah.
And I think this is a big, if I could add something to one of my previous one of the previous questions that you had of like, what are the things that I think change in the next 5 years? Another one that I sort of have my fingers crossed for is that data folks are looped in closer into the product development lifecycle. Instead of just of like every problem that comes up, it sort of becomes like almost like an academic project where we put our heads down and we sort of do work in a bubble for 3 months. We start by saying we are also a part of the product. We work with the data, which is one of the end outputs of a product. But that doesn't mean that we can't influence the inputs or the design of the product as well. So I would love for that to happen more, and I don't think that it's encouraged enough.
Yeah, we're often just kind of viewed as like I explain data engineering as kind of the middle child, and literally like almost to the literal sense, right? Like you've got software on one side, they're doing their own thing, they're hot shit because they're the ones that build the application that make the money. You have data science and ML on the other side who are then increasing revenue in their own ways, and then you have data eng that's just like, you guys just make sure stuff's right. That's all. Like that's your role. Just you get to deal with both our problems, and just have to work it through the middle. So it's great.
We're the ones that make the money. You guys just keep stuff working. It's like
So it's kind of this depressing cost center life. Speaking and I don't know how much time you have. I think I've set this till 8:15. Let me know if you need to.
I can keep going.
Yeah. I think one thing I was thinking of, because you brought up data products, and obviously I'm just curious on your thoughts in terms of like data products at that next level where it's like, Snowflake, Databricks, Palantir included, are all like, we want to be your data platform that you come to and use as like an operating system and build applications on top of that. Is that something you're feeling like is going forward somewhere? What are your thoughts in that space?
I think that's probably inevitable. But I also think it's jumping the gun a little bit, like in order for you to be an operating system, you have to have a way to ensure quality first. And I think that's a pretty big piece that's missing right now is how do you actually ensure quality throughout the entire data ecosystem, out the other side, and into whatever this like brand new application is going to be. Software engineers have stack trace. And what happens if like some data app or whatever it is like starts breaking? Like where do you go if there's nobody? It really comes back to the ownership and accountability question again. Who is on the hook for these things? I understand why these products I understand why they want to say that, right? Like it makes total sense from a vendor perspective why you would want that. But I do think that there's more foundational work on just establishing accountability and quality all the way through the system before that happens. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great way of putting it. Just like, we're kind of like, we want to go there, but first we have all this other stuff to deal with. How does Convoy kind of deal with data quality? Do you have internal tool, external tool that you're using to kind of manage that, or?
Yeah, so we have some internal tools that we've built. We've combined that with some open source solutions. I think honestly, one of the biggest successes that I personally have made at our time at Convoy is relative to other data engineering teams, I think that we probably handle 50 to 75% less tickets. And the reason why that is because we've demonstrated that building new things generates radically more ROI for the company. I've been able to show that, actually show that, we built this, and this. This made the company this many dollars, and I can measure that. And so it doesn't make sense for my team to spend all this time solving these problems. Instead, what you should do is if there's a holistic or systemic problem, we'll go and focus on that. And then we'll devote sort of a part of our resources to answering these things in the backlog. But in terms of our actual the tools, one of the things that we built is something that we call the Unified Events Definition Framework. Okay. And essentially what that is a vehicle to emit or to create and implement data contracts directly in a service. So a data engineer can say, hey, I want this data, I want it in this format. and I want you, the software engineer, to take accountability for that and go and treat it like an API. We will auto construct the pipeline. So after if they're using our SDK, we'll build a pipeline. We use Kafka. We will automatically stream that into the warehouse, into sort of a raw table, and then we have macros that run that automatically parse that JSON and turn it into a source table. So we'll do that both for events, but then we will also wrap production tables in APIs as essentially as an abstraction layer that the engineer can say, I'm going to keep the internal details of my service. Like that's just going to be for me and nobody else. And then if a data consumer asks me to, add like a new property to a dimensional table, I can do that. And it's all version controlled and everything else. And that's great, right? It's nice for software engineers because having like a strong decoupling is always something that they want and appreciate. So we manage those pipelines. We generate all the data. The thing that I'm really excited about that we're working on right now. So we also have a catalog that captures like all the events data, connects to schema registry, shows you like, hey, here's the events that you have. Here's how those events map to like the underlying tables in the data warehouse. The next thing we're working on is a certification system.
Okay.
Where basically a team of BIEs or data engineers can set standards. So they can set a standard as like bronze certified, silver certified, gold certified, and here's all the criteria you have to meet. Like in order to be silver certified, it means you need documentation for the table and for every column. And maybe there's like a whole bunch of other things that you need in order to hit that certification level. And then depending on the certification level that you get determines how you can use that data. So if you've just hit bronze, then yeah, you can use it yourself. Maybe you can do some ad hoc analysis on your own team or whatever, but you can't create any dashboards that are publicly accessible to the company. You can't, if you haven't hit gold, then you can't use that data in like a production machine learning model. So this is one of the ways that we are trying to ensure data quality all the way from production through the warehouse and then into the actual systems that leverage that data.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think is the gold, silver, bronze thing like automated in terms of like going forward, like ad hoc work? Like, does it detect that and like, okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yes.
Really cool. Okay, there's let's see. So someone asking in terms of like salaries, basically, are new grads earning the same or close to veteran data analysts at the moment? How does that kind of feel?
I think if you have to ask that question, you should change jobs, because like there is so much demand for veteran data people. Like seriously, like I actually mean this seriously. Like if you feel as though you are, if you feel as though new grads and junior people are, like taking home these like massive salaries and huge amounts of equity, and you're not, I can guarantee you that if you transitioned to another role, like you would get snapped up in a heartbeat. The demand for data engineers right now is insane. Convoy is not paying peanuts, okay? And it has been incredibly hard for us to hire to fill data engineering headcount. There is so much competition that even the businesses, with like hundreds of millions of dollars in funding are getting squeezed out. So if that is something you're worried about, I would just recommend like finding a new position. It should be really easy.
Yeah, that like you makes me think of just Zach Wilson's post of like, I'm over here at Airbnb or Netflix, and it's like it's almost worth it for some of these roles to be like, quit your job, practice for like 6 months to pass an interview. Like that's almost how much these jobs are paying, where it's like $400,000-$500,000 a year. And
Exactly.
those are definitely like the top 10% jobs, so they're not everywhere, just to be clear for anyone else.
Yeah,
it's still hard to get.
Exactly. They're still hard to get. Like you're still going to have to compete, but even outside the top 10%, it's still pretty good. The thing that I would recommend, and honestly, this is something that I probably did up until I got to Convoy, is I was interviewing like like when I was sort of at my peak, I was interviewing 2 to 3 times a month. And that wasn't even, sometimes it wasn't even because I wanted the job. It was just to be familiar with the interview process, so I knew how to answer the questions. And so if I did see a role that I really wanted come up, like it would basically be a sure thing, or at the very least I would have like a much higher likelihood of getting it. Yeah, the whole go and do leak code is such a brain burner.
Yeah. And it's going to depend on the company. I think it's always the hard thing. It's like, what should I study? It's like, I don't know which company you're going for. It's
Right.
like
Yeah.
Amazon's not as heavy in software, and neither is Facebook. But I think Netflix, from what I've heard, as is Lyft. You're just gonna have to do a lot of pre kind of digging into what you're gonna get asked. So
Yes.
yeah. I don't know if you want to answer this one. You can read this and see if you want to answer this, but.
Can you give approximate TC for Convoy Senior DE? If not, especially in public, that's okay too. Yeah, I this is one of those things that I personally wouldn't mind giving out, but I also don't know if my HR team would come and yell at me. So I probably won't bring that up.
Yeah. Okay, so this one's a better question. So, what makes the difference between a mid and senior engineer for you?
Yeah, so at Convoy, we actually have a rubric that explains these things pretty well. Generally speaking, a early stage engineer, just like at a high level, is someone that you can basically go and tell them, hey, this is what I want you to do. They go and implement it. The quality is good, and yeah, that's it. A mid-level engineer is usually one where they are actively contributing their own ideas, and they're able to implement those on their own, and the quality is quite high. This is also the time when people are expected to start thinking about scalability and robustness, and like hardening of pipelines and things like that.
Yeah.
When you get to a senior engineer, the expectation is that you're beginning to not just offer sort of suggestions, but you're actually like driving significant projects within the team, right? Like you're saying, hey, this is the next thing that we need to do. This is going to be a big investment. Here's how we're gonna do it. You're basically expected to lead that, and then the level after that is principal. And the principal engineer is one that is expected to do that across the entire business. Yeah. So you're not just working within your team. You're actually looking for opportunities across like multiple teams. So you might say like, okay, yeah, we could build a better streaming pipeline, or but then you might want to go and talk, like maybe you'll go and talk to the team over on finance, and you talk to the team over on the shipments organization, and you realize that there's something that you could build like specifically for those organizations that would, I don't know, improve their like speed of contract approval by 20%, right? Yeah. That's sort of the graduation.
Yeah. So what I heard is you got to talk to more people.
You got to talk to more people. I cannot stress that enough. Like as you go up, as you are promoted, it is, I mean, a lot of people will call this sort of politics, and like in some ways that's true, but I think that's almost like, it can be an unfair characterization, because it's not politics as much as you're just expected to have a bigger impact, and bigger impacts come from working with more people, and the only way to do that is by like bringing more people into the process, driving alignment across like 10 or 20 different people, and that involves like speaking to them one-on-one and understanding what they want. And ideally, like as you go through these, having a lot of different meetings, like you become friends with people. So folks look at that and they go, oh, so-and-so only was promoted because they're friends with like, this person and that person, that person. It's like, yeah, is that what happened? Or is what actually happened like they're driving some big initiative, they talk to that person all the time, and so now they're on good terms with them, right? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I can see why. Like, it's like, is there maybe something that like reflects some level of politics, maybe, but more than likely, again, you're still having to deliver something. You're still having to like figure out what the problem is, and that means you
Right.
have to talk to people, and you can't just sit in your own little bubble and be like, I know what the problem is. It's just too big of a company. You'll never understand it all, and yeah, that's the only way you're gonna do it. So no, I love that. All right. Well, I don't want to go too late, and I usually try to cut off somewhere around here. So,
Sure.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like before we kind of wrap this up, do you have any questions for me or anything else as we're kind of closing this out?
I don't have any questions, but I've really enjoyed talking to you, and
Yeah.
yeah, I hope I was able to make up for the 8 or 9 minutes that I was trying to fix my Wi-Fi. So
You're all good. I think I was like, he must be something. I was just like, oh no, hopefully he's fine.
yeah.
No, but it's all good. I totally get it. Like I'm always kind of also paranoid as we're working from home. But yeah, appreciate your time. Appreciate all the perspective that you've added. Again, for me, this is going back to the talking to people. This is a great way. I've kind of like figured out like, oh, I can like kind of scale talking to people while also communicating to an audience. So this was great. Learned a lot. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to hit end broadcast here. Thanks everyone for joining in. Let's hit end broadcast.